Veta
It's good to have a great crowd. We're really glad to have Veronica here because we had to cancel her last time because of the snowstorm. So we're glad to have a sunny, cold day, but we're glad to have Veronica, and we can think about how great it would be sailing someplace today on the blue water and the sun and all of that. I just want to tell you two things. One, if you would please silence your cell phones. We're taping this, and so we don't want to have your cell phone on the tape. And we'll have this on Facebook for people that didn't get a chance to see it. And we've got a program next week that Joelle Matthews is bringing called Need to Grow. And it's a documentary about some of our problems that we're going to run out of topsoil and all of that, and some of the solutions that we can look for. And she said it's a really great award-winning documentary. It's going to be next Thursday, and it's going to be at 5:30. So it won't be our usual afternoon program, but she wanted to offer it for some of the people that, you know, have a 9-to-5 and might be really interested in this.
Will we be able to take the documentary out if we can't make that time?
It's Joelle's. It doesn't really belong to the library. So you could ask her. We'll probably get it for our collection as well, but we don't have it at this time. And so she should be done by 7, because I think something's going on at the Mercantile that night. And then, of course, the big exciting news at the library is about our tech classes that will be happening in January. And so the actual registration starts January 2nd. And there's all kinds of classes for all kinds of levels, all the way from beginners to people that are very tech savvy already but just have a few more things they want to get refreshed on. So we've got Rachel and Ashley that are doing this, and we're really excited about being able to offer this for all of you guys. So that's great. That's what's coming on. And then we all know Victoria, Veronica Marino, and we're really glad to have her here today to talk about what she did and what we've all aspired to do, but we never did it. So, anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to keep telling myself I'm amongst friends. I actually get a little nervous, which I don't expect to, because you know I don't feel funny talking in front of people, right? I decided when I had an extra chance to reschedule that I would give a poem away. You get swag, as I'd say, you know, that's what they call it now, right? So I'm giving you a poem. You can give it as a gift to a friend. My copyright is at the bottom. And it's about the sea, because one of the things that's so easy to get caught up in is all the mundane things about how I got on the boat and what was going on in my life at that moment, that I would just walk away from my family and go off to the Caribbean. I want to make sure that I don't forget the #1 attraction, the star of the show, which is the ocean. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this here is because I had done a talk for a group of students that were putting on their own version of Peter Pan back in New York. And the teenage girls would sit there and say, they were the pirates. The teenage girls were the pirates in this show. And they were saying, if that captain ever told me to do that, I would tell him off. And I was like, oh no, not pirate ship, army, navy, whatever. It doesn't matter. When you're on a boat, the one thing I really wanted to convey to them were a couple of things that were about the idea that you can't walk away. You have to follow a certain hierarchy, because you are always in a life or death situation on a boat in the middle of an ocean. And also that you never know who's going to save your life because of that. You never know, you might have a problem with somebody, but that person might really be able to help you out, either with your work that you have or in an accident. And the great thing about my trip, that I come to you with this story, is because we did have some accidents. and that makes for an exciting story. But there's nowhere to go but to dive in, of course, and follow my notes. Otherwise, I'll just sit up here mumbling. It was 1989. I turned 27 years old in May of that year. Right after that, I got a chance to go to Russia with my grandmother. And while I had grown up traveling a lot, I had not done any traveling in a long time. And I think that being able to leave behind Western civilization to go to the very first opening of Glasnost of the Soviet Union, it felt very far away and felt very exotic, and was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I came back to New York feeling a little bit more like, that was good. I needed that. And indeed, right within 5 days after we had returned, my grandfather passed away. And he was a really special, special person in general, but also very close to me, and it was sudden. And I look at these things because I can see how I became sort of untethered in the year that followed that. And I've looked to what precipitated these things, and I think that was part of it, was really this incredible loss. And one thing that happened was I ended up feeling guilty when I actually did go away, because I kind of left my mom. I had a younger brother who was 20 years younger than me, and he was only around 9 when I did leave to go on down to the Caribbean. But so this is a picture of me in Nepal when I am 10 years old. Some of you I've told that my mother was a free spirit completely, and we traveled all through the Rockies. When I was a child, I lived in Salt Lake City, I lived in California, we went through again, I lived in Idaho after our time in Nepal. She loved the Himalayas, we went there, we spent 1.5 years there.
Wow.
She was a young mother, so she was only about 27 at the time, and she was a writer, and she thought nothing of saying, Veronica, get out of here. I need some time alone to write. And I would walk the streets of Kathmandu at 9 years old. And that, while it was difficult at the time, it was a hard time growing up with somebody that needed that time to herself and that was always taking us different places, but I learned a lot. And I don't know if I would have done this trip if not for these types of experiences, but I felt very comfortable just saying, I felt more comfortable than the average person just going off into the unknown because of that. When through 1990, when in the beginning of 1990, I was working at a pub in Greenwich Village, and these 4 people came in who were all my age, and they worked on yachts in the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. They were British. Some were British American, and the girl was Australian. And they told me about their life, and I spent time with them. I took them around the city. I ended up going down to Florida and meeting them there. I went to Barcelona and met them at the end of 1990. And I actually stayed on the yacht that they were working on secretly. It was Saudi owned, and it was called the Masara. And it was huge. It was 137 feet, and it had a crew like a small naval vessel. I mean, they had all these people that were Japanese, that were from Okinawa, that were working in the kitchen and working as engineers and deckhands, and then there was this small group of British, American, Australian.
And one stowaway.
And one stowaway, but we were just in dry dock in Barcelona. But getting to know these people started to, I was feeling untethered and getting to hear from them about this great life. They made plenty of money. They had money just falling out of their pockets. They were like, oh, we'll buy this, we'll do this, we'll, pay for your hotel room, whatever, and I was like, wow, that's nice. And they came back at the end of 1990, back to New York, and they told me they were going to be going to Antigua, which is right here. And that was a location that a lot of crews changed boats. So they were not necessarily holding it out there to me as much as saying, oh, you should do it, you should do it. Well, the funny thing is they didn't know who they were talking to, because then I did do it. And when I got there, they were all like, what did you do? You know? But I did, a funny thing started to happen while I was there in New York and thinking of going down to Antigua. That was the Caribbean. I could get there, I could buy a ticket, put my stuff in storage. This could work. I started talking at the pub where I worked, and it turned out that a very good friend, whose sister I had grown up with, he had a friend who had a boat in Antigua that I could stay on. And he would call them and it wouldn't be a problem. And I was like, well, that's amazing. And what's even more amazing is that then when I went there and I stayed on this boat, it turned out it was right in the center of the area where all these yachties came to crew up and change different yachts. Some of the yachts were privately owned, some were charters, where people would work on them as charters. This is something that was really like my kind of dream, you know, me sailing into my destiny. I had done some sailing up in Vancouver at one point in my life, but like for an afternoon or 2 afternoons. Of actually doing the ropes myself. I had been on sailboats in New York Harbor, and one thing to remember, you know, New York calls itself City of Water. That's one of its, and you do get to go on a lot of boats when you're in New York. So they're hard to avoid. So I was really looking forward to it. I got on that boat. I mean, I flew down to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and from there changed planes, and next thing I knew I was in Antigua with my bags on my way to Tony Fincham's boat, New Freedom. And he was a funny guy. He had sailed from England. He had built this boat himself. It had a cement hull, which was not very common. And he was kind of known around there. He'd been there for 15 years or so. The boat didn't go anywhere. It just sat there stern to, back end towards this hotel that was there called the Copper and Lumber, which was a very nice hotel in an area that was called Nelson's Dockyard. And there'll be more pictures of that coming up. But Nelson's Dockyard in English Harbor. And during the mid-1700s, Nelson indeed was stationed there. And you had all these beautiful colonial stone buildings that were all part of the area there. It was a very secluded harbor, natural harbor. And so a lot of ships went through there, not pirate ships. You have that in certain parts of the Caribbean, but these were more English naval ships that went there for repairs. It was also a good place to keep your ships if there was going to be a hurricane. When I got there, I, didn't really know what I was going to do. I thought maybe I'd get a job working as a waitress. But I found out, no, you can't work on land with, they don't give out visas for work permits there. You can't get that. Mm-hmm. But if you very kind of secretly went from boat to boat, you could get a job, even though it wasn't really smiled upon by the Antigua government, which is an independent government, even though they were once owned by England. So I knew that, well, maybe I can get a job on a boat. And maybe I didn't, all I knew of it was what these people had told me. So it seemed like a great possibility. I was really just throwing my hat into the ring. There was in this area Nelson's Dockyard, perhaps around 200 young people all working on boats. And there were staying, whether they were off at anchor or were there in the docks around there, there were probably a good 60 or 70 boats within a stone's throw, as well as more in other parts of Antigua. So this is the Copper and Lumber Hotel, and so the boat I was staying on was right here, right This is a more recent picture, but it looked very much like that when I was there. And I went and talked to people, and they said, oh, you know, you should be able to, you were working as a waitress, so you should be able to get a job as a stewardess. I didn't know what that was. I said, okay. I went to the local crewmaster, and her name was Josie, and she was British. And everybody said, well, she's very nasty, but she could get you a job probably. You're going to have to go talk to her at some point. And when I went to talk to her, she could not have been nicer to me. And she said, if you've been a waitress in New York, you can work anywhere. And I thought that was great. Now, one of the things she told me is, what you really need to do is go back to New York and go do some cooking schooling. Because when you're a cook, I can place you on any boat there is. Everybody is always looking for cooks. So this is something you can pass on to the people you know if you don't want to take it up yourself. And she sounded very positive that she would put me up for some jobs. And I was happy about that. I also knew that if I followed the weekly schedule, and every single person followed this schedule, this was of the yachties, they all, Monday night they went to the galley bar, Tuesday night to the Copper and Lumber Bar, and there would be music and dancing. Wednesday, they'd go to Catamaran Club or Colombo's, those were farther away, I didn't go there. Thursday, the Yacht Club at English Harbor. Thursday was race day, and there were always little races, and you all ended up back at the Yacht Club, and there was a pizza place there. Friday, again, Copper and Lumber had more music and dancing and things like that. And then Saturday was this Abracadabra, a true restaurant where I couldn't afford to go, or back to the galley bar. But what was great is if you went to these places, everyone was there, so you could ask about jobs. And so I went through and I got to know everybody. And on New Freedom, as being able to stay on Tony Fincham's boat, I did odd jobs for him. I scraped the anti-foulant off the bottom of boats and then repainted them and got all the barnacles off and everything. I'd wash down the decks every morning. And there was a big motor yacht right next to us, and this fellow, who I ended up seeing years later, when I was living in Holland, just out of nowhere, to show that like the world is so circular and full of coincidences. And he said to me, he said, if I see you up at 5 a.m. every morning washing down that deck, if I knew of a job, I'd put you up for it. So I felt very good about this. And I also, I was told to go walk over to the different marinas. I got over to the Catamaran Club. There was a boat called the America, and the America, you know, the America was known as it was an old gaff-rigged schooner. It wasn't that nice a boat to get a job on, and they didn't pay as much as the motor yachts. They paid about half. The motor yachts, you could make $2,500 a month in your pocket, all expenses paid, meals taken care of, no keys, you live on the boat. You know, and that's nice money, right, to be able to sock away. And I went over there. The captain of the America was, there we go. This is Nelson's dockyard, and that's English Harbor, the back one there.
Where's the old building we just saw?
That's this right
Right
here.
there? Okay.
That's it right there.
Okay.
And then here, these were all up through here were all the old stone buildings that had been storehouses for sales and different carpenters' houses and all these, some were some officers' houses and all the same beautiful stone and wood, and there were even the capstans, you know, where they would tie up a ship and they bring it around this big, huge metal stand that then would help them tie up the ship. And things that are beyond me, because again, I kind of just threw my hat into all of this. This is the wider shot there. There were, you know, tourists would come here just to come to the beaches, to see all the historical parts of Nelson's Harbor. And there was a place called Shirley Heights that was this old lookout that people would go up to. It was a beautiful, beautiful area of the world. And In the spring, it was perfect temperature, but in the summer, no, you don't want to be there. It's too hot, too many storms, and all that. Anyway, I went to Catamaran Club, saw America, spoke with Joel Dressel, who was the master and captain, and he was American also. There weren't a lot of Americans there. It was mostly British. Some Dutch, some Aussies, some New Zealanders, some South Africans, a lot of people from the colonies. And when you're American in these situations, it's tough, it really is. I got sent up by Josie, the woman who was the crew master for this boat, Florchie, and I had to do an interview with the first mate, but standing with her were about 4 of the deckhands, and they're all these young British guys, and they were just talking me down right there to my face while I was, you know, applying for the job. You've never even been on a boat, you've never done this, why should we hire you? You know, and you know, the general thing, if you don't know it, is that, you know, Americans aren't that smart, you know, so it's tough, it's tough. So it was nice that the captain of America was American. He didn't know, though. He said it would be a few months before they'd be leaving. He wouldn't know, but he'd keep me in mind. I walked 5 miles to St. James Marina. I'm like Lincoln, you know, going to try to get a job there, and went and put in my CV with everybody, and, you know, I really wanted it. And I think in life, you know, the result of that seems to me to be true. If you really pursue something, something will come out of it, right? I was also doing some of the Thursday races on a boat called Magic. This was a small sloop, 1 mast, and it was owned by a guy from Massachusetts. And this was just people saying, I need extra hands, or I need ballast. Ballast is that when the boat starts to careen to this side, they need people to sit on the high side of the boat to, by weighing it down, you actually pick up speed then. I raced with them. I had the most wonderful experience racing with them on Magic, where there was a young island guy, an Antiguan named Bongo, and there was this girl, Agatha, who was Portuguese. And she was such a fine sailor. But Bongo was actually in very high demand to sail on the Thursday races. And we are out, and we have a boat alongside of us, and, you know, the captain's steering, I'm just pulling on ropes and, you know, doing the winch and stuff, and all of a sudden the captain says, I can't steer, something's wrong with the rudder. And sure enough, they looked behind them, and one of the sheets, one of the ropes for the sails, was down under the boat and wrapped around the rudder. No problem. One of the guys holds Bongo by the legs, and that young man went into the water head first, reached around while we were moving, and untangled it and came up with the rope, arching his back, and they pulled him quickly back onto the boat, falling over. The great thing about doing these races was I started to learn the different terms, which I didn't really know. And sometimes I still don't know and still can't remember everything that I worked with, but I like learning by doing. And so Magic was invaluable for me. Another was that because of Agatha, she called me to help her clean up a boat that she was going to be taking around the bottom of South America, the Palmares, and I worked there, and that was also out at the Catamaran Club near the America. So because she had asked me to come work with her, I got to be over there, I got to speak to the crew of America more, and in fact, that skipper also put in a recommendation for me. I had applied with him to see if I could be another hand on their boat, the Palmares, and I had written on my CV that I had learned French, you know, what other languages, that's important when you're going to be taking care of different tourists and things. So I said that I'd spoken French, you know, and he said, so he just, of course, said something to me in French, and I didn't know what he was saying. This was another British guy. You're stupid, you're American, you know, like, you know, he said, well, how can you say you speak French when I just asked you for something in French and you didn't know what I meant? And I'm like, oh, I'm a failure, you know? And so, of course, you know, I don't have all the pictures it would be nice to have. One of the things that was part of being in Antigua, with this very strict rule about working there, they also had very strict rules about when you couldn't be there unless you had a ticket off the island. They didn't want people coming and crewing up there, so they didn't want people arriving with a one-way ticket. It was almost like it was an agreement between them and the one airline company that flew people there. So I let my ticket expire a month after I'd gotten there in March, beginning of March. And, but to let that ticket expire when I needed to go get my visa extended, I had to buy a ticket. And the cheapest ticket I could buy was a ticket to Dominica, which is really just like a jungle, you know? And people, they said, oh, you're going to Dominica? What are you going to do there? I was like, oh, I'm going to go there. I have a boat meeting me there that I'm going to work on. Oh, okay. And finally, during this time when I was working out these visa things, the captain from America had let me know that he would be able to hire me, but in a month's time. During that time, I also found a job doing what's called a delivery to another island. So this is a one-way trip where you help someone sail the boat that they are sailing by themselves. I agreed to sail a boat from Antigua down to the Grenadines in St. Vincent. We went to this beautiful little island, Bequia, where I did some around the island races on another boat that was a really fancy sailboat. And that was a great, thrilling experience to be in a race like that. But going down there on Clover with this guy who was from New Hampshire, can't remember his name at all, was an amazing experience. It taught me a lot. I was on watches by myself, steering his boat while he slept. It's hard to stay awake at night when you're sitting there looking at the compass, you know. You're out on deck, and it feels so soft on your skin and everything. We went to Dominica, where there actually was like a little bit of, not straight out piracy, but the island people were known for wanting to, they were very poor. Let's just say they were extremely impoverished country, Dominica, that's mostly owned by Chiquita bananas or something like that, and most of the bananas that you would eat at that time were from there. But it was dangerous when we were in Dominica, and that was really something. And then some of the Guadeloupe and Martinique were two French-owned islands, and those actually had more infrastructure than any of the other Caribbean islands on these, I believe these are the Windward Islands here. And Martinique is known for having French fashions and French food if you go there. You can do very well in Martinique. But anyway, got to do this trip, and I was on Clover here, and I flew back. And the day after or the same day I first took a ferry back to St. Vincent's to fly out, America came in to that port. They had just been, basically, their boat, America, had been damaged heavily in their last trip. And they just needed to keep the crew in good working order, but they didn't even have their masts up or sails at that point. The America. The America is named for the original America that the America's Cup is named after. The America's Cup is named after the boat, the America. It was a challenge made by the New York Yacht Club with their English peers to have on around, I think the actual place they had it was in England by the Isle of Wight. And the American ship won. So this was the original America. My boat that I was on was a replica that had been made in 1967 up in Maine by the Schaefer Brewing Company for a movie about the America. But they had made it as a replica. Now, so you have the 1860s style of boat and a replica of it made in 1967. It's lumbering. It doesn't really handle that well, actually, even though the America did very well against the other boats of the time. The boat, the America that I was on, which these are pictures of, was 100 feet from stern to bow, and then there was a bowsprit, that long wooden pole that comes off the end that the jib is attached to, one of the sails is attached to. So 100 feet, and then this was another 15 feet. And we would all sit out here, which was great fun. No straps or seat belts or anything, just riding the waves, holding on. This is your jib sail. This really catches the wind. Sometimes this is all you put up. We actually did motor across the Atlantic. We only turned our motors off twice, but we would still raise different sails to give us a little extra energy. This is the staysail. This is the foremast and the foresail, and this is the mainmast and the mainsail. That's the topsail. You see on top of the mainsail, you have that wooden boom. That is the gaff, that the gaff rig is named for. And I do believe that that style of boat required us to have a bigger crew than if they had just been triangular sails. Also, you have power sailors now, where you just push a button and the sail goes up. This did not work that way. This was manpower, but also using pulleys. And I think that that's part of my interest in some of the science and physics that I love, is seeing how pulleys work and how a block and tackle works. It's just absolutely fascinating. The crew, so when I joined, the masts were not on. They had come off on the voyage that they had taken to Antigua. They had been in a terrible storm off the Canary Islands
And they
had
lost
their
both
masts.
masts?
Yes, they did. And so what was neat that I got to do was, I joined the crew before the mast went in. So I actually got to do the threading here of the lashing of this sail to that boom there with them. And that was a nice feeling, you know, when you've actually put that into how the boat's going to work.
Excuse me, are those sails attached to the mast with wooden rings?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, okay. I thought that's what I was seeing, but
Yes.
didn't know.
Yes, and things can get tangled. That's another thing you have to take care of. You know, you have the ones now where there's something that goes in a groove and they go up that way with a metal mast. These were wooden poles, just like you have for telephone poles.
And are you canvas?
And the sails are canvas with a bit of plastic in them. When you're folding them, they don't want to fold well. They're very tough, and they can easily take you flying off the boat if the wind catches it. Okay. So this is a picture I got online, because I don't have pictures. This is the forecastle, the forecastle, which is shortened to the word forecastle. And this is where the male crew members slept. And really, they had my life compared to their life very far apart. All four of them slept in this little triangular section in the bow of the boat. When you're on the boat and you're below deck, there's no windows. This isn't some ocean liner. It's dark under there. If you get any real light, it's from a hatch being opened. And they did have a hatch up there. But all four of them just slept on bunks right along the side of the boat there. And, you know, you heard all stories of how they didn't get along because of things that happened while they were sleeping or where their stuff was. They had the real crush of having to get along with each other. And they really were mad at each other the whole time. I got to be in my own little bunk right off the mess where we ate, which is a table surrounded by a banquet couch. I had a bunk with the cook, who was the only other female on the boat. And she and I had our own room. We had pictures up in there. We had our own head. We had our own bathroom.
Wow.
This was the best thing, since sliced bread, because in the boy's head, the guy's head, the captain had his own head, by the way. He had a whole little suite off the side. But the boys, you would go in there, and there would be an inch of water on the floor in there, and I don't know what it was. I have to put some things away in there sometimes, and I would just be like, oh.
Right, so you were not brought on as cook, you were brought on as crew.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was brought on as a stewardess, $1,200 a month. Again, money in your pocket, because you're not paying for any living.
What
your
did
food.
you do as a stewardess?
I will
Oh,
definitely
okay.
get into
I just
that.
didn't know.
No, I know,
what that meant.
yes. So, this is not the saloon of America. This is not the owner's quarters of America, but it shows very similar to what the owner's quarters was. So of that whole boat, America, you had half of it that was, we had a very large galley, a very large kitchen right in the middle of it. But you had more space allowed for the owners, which could sleep 9, not so comfortably. It could sleep 4 very comfortably. And then the crew and captain, which was 7 of us, sleeping in the other half, the front end of the boat. The front end of the boat, because that's what gets the most action. The stern of the boat, the back, is the more steady place to be if you're ever picking out sailing accommodations. What was nice as the stewardess, I had to keep up the owner's quarters when they were not on. The wood had to be polished at least once a week. There was a copper stove and copper piping, as well as brass everywhere. With the salt air, that had to be polished at least once a week, and then wrapped in saran wrap to keep it good. I would polish and I'd use rubber gloves, and the gloves would just get eaten away by the polish, and all my fingernails were all just shot, from doing all of that. And the sad thing about it is that most of the women's work for the cook as well takes place below deck. No tan. The guys are on deck all day, they're all, and very fit, of course, But what's the nice thing for me was that I got to be alone. And that is, after a while, when you're around other people all the time and can't get away from them, that's okay. It's good to be able to be alone. The most striking thing about being on a boat like that, and this whole idea of the crush of people and their emotions and the things that you're all required to do whether you feel like it or not. Maybe the captain's in a bad mood, and maybe the cook is in a bad mood, and maybe the first mate is in a bad mood, and you're going to pay for that. And you have this full crush below deck. You come up on deck, even if there's work to be done, the minute you come up there, and you have the cloche of the blue sky completely over you. You are there in the beautiful, the hand of God, of just providence is there, just cradling you. You feel so taken care of above deck. And then you go below deck and you're a slave again, The captain, very importantly, had been a very heavy drinker. Like a bottle of bourbon a day type of drinker.
Wow.
And the crew had a lot to say about it. And it was a funny thing because of the different people that were on the boat, they weren't really planning on trying to leave, it seemed like, when I first joined. In the end, a couple of people did leave, and we had new crew put on before we set off across the ocean. But there was a lot of complaining about the captain. Now, the captain had quit drinking after losing the masts, or at least after they got to Antigua. But, you know, when I heard about this, and of course I only heard after I'd been hired, because, you know, you're not on the inside yet, right? And I heard about this, and, you know, you always say to yourself, well, he's probably going to be in a bad mood some of the time. Maybe just stop drinking, you know? And that definitely was an issue. And the thing is, at sea, the captain isn't just the captain of the ship, he's the captain of you. He's the emperor. He is. And then next to him, the first mate. And I'll get to introduce you to all my people. But another thing about being at sea that you don't know unless you've ever traveled on a boat at night. And again, gives you this very special spiritual feeling, is that the moon follows you wherever you go. You know, this is all you see. You never see the moonbeam going that way across it. Wherever you move, no matter how far you move, that moonbeam across the water always goes straight to you. And it's one of the most beautiful, fantastic things. And the light of the moon with the hatches open, you'd wake up in the middle of the night and you'd see the silver, just like we saw last night all over our beautiful valley here. It's that same enchantment. And I mean, being here on the plains and with that windswept feeling is very similar to being on the ocean. When you're on the ocean, the water looks as though it's solid. You don't see through it. It looks like it's obsidian, some kind of shale or something. Even though it's moving, it looks like you can't necessarily penetrate it. And all of a sudden, what happens but dolphins come flying out of there. And the dolphins were just the most magical thing. We'd be riding along, minding our own business, having a terrible day in paradise. And, you know, because the captain this and the first mate that, and, oh, you know. And all of a sudden, you'd see them on the edge of the horizon, and they'd be jumping up. They'd be jumping up like they're going like, hello, hello. And then you'd see them coming at you. And they'd come, and we'd all go running out to the bowsprit and sit out there with our legs wrapped around it. And they would go right in front of the prow. And they just loved being right there and feeling that push of the water. And they love it. And they smile at you. And it's just the most wonderful thing. Now, one time when we were further along on our trip, I was by myself out on the deck of the boat. Everybody else was gone. Peace again, you know. And all of a sudden, a whale breached right next to me. I almost jumped off the boat myself. I was so scared. So the animals of the ocean are definitely one of the best things. This is my photo from there. So there's the boat. This is me, actually. And later on, you'll see where the fellow was who took this picture. This is while we were in the middle of the ocean. He went out on one of the booms, and I think he walked the ropes out to it. There was a lot of daredevil stuff. Most of the time on these boats, not that anyone ever talked about insurance or you signed anything, not in 1991, you know, that was ancient history, you know. And these guys did things without ever wearing any kind of safety harnesses or anything like that. We had an emergency. We never did any drills. I know people who ran drills on the boats all the time, and they try to think of, oh, there's a fire, but at the same time, a woman is ill at the same time, and you have to take care of both things at once. We never did any of that. We were reckless. But it wasn't my fault. So, the crew of America. Joel Dressel was the master as well as the captain. The master means that he had actually stayed with the boat through different owners. In fact, we were owned by the owner of Real Madrid. We were owned by a Spanish millionaire. His name was Ramon Mendoza. He's passed away now. When I was on the boat, he was 70 years old. He was a little man. He'd sit there listening to his transistor like this. His wife was Swiss. She was very hard. We won't talk about that right now. But Joel Joel was the master. He had worked for the Argentinian owner before Ramon Mendoza. He knew that boat backwards and forwards. Juana, Herbert Benton, we only called him Juana. He was really something. He was the same age as Joel. They were both in their early 60s, maybe mid-60s. He had worked all over Africa, he was an engineer, and he had gone and set up generators and things like that, much like, maybe you've met him on your travels read. and that was his name from Africa. And he was fun. He really was one of these guys straight out of some movie, you know, with all the right things. David Niven, you know what I mean? All the right things to say. And he ended up leaving about 1 month before we set sail across the ocean. He had some other job back in England he had to go to. We hired this guy, Jim Smith, who was an American, who famously said after we crossed the ocean, and he was always unhappy and didn't like working with the boat, and all these things were going wrong for him that he wasn't prepared for. He said, we're sitting in Ibiza, and he said, what I really wish I was doing was being a dairy farmer in the north of England. And I said, well, you're kind of going about that the wrong way, buddy. You know? Isabelle Ajoulay, the cook, she and I it was wonderful. We had our birthdays 17 days apart while we were in the middle of the ocean. She was from Paris. She had actually trained to be a seamstress for Christian Dior, and but she had fallen in love with sailing. She'd gone down to Perth, Australia, to follow some friends down there or something, and had done sailing down there, and decided to work as a sailor, work as a yachty, and to work as a cook, to be able to make enough money to open a dress shop in Perth. I never stayed in touch with any of these people after I left. And even if you wanted to stay in touch, you get letters, you know, a month after, 2 months after they've been written in some other, if your letters get sent ahead to the next post office. It's not a very, now that there's emailing, of course, that's changed everything, but the whole post situation had a lot to be desired. Our first mate, Hassan Abada, he was, the further I get away from Hassan, the more I appreciate Hassan. Because he had a humility about him that was not shown to the rest of us while he was lording it over us, but he was such a sailor. He was the full Douglas Fairbanks. He would sit there going from rope to rope up in the sky. Not while we were at sea, but while he was fixing things and doing painting and shellacking and stuff like that. And he was an excellent sailor. What he didn't know how to do that most first mates do is how to navigate. He didn't read English. He didn't know how to use the satellite navigation system, but he had learned how to sail on the shores of Morocco on fishing boats, and he was an amazing sailor. And when I say his humility, I think that's all he wanted to be, is who he was, you know, and that's an enviable position. To see him in the emergency that we had that I'm alluding to was really to see something spectacular. I was hired as the stewardess, as I said. I had a lot of upkeep. I was like a regular deckhand when there were not owners on board, in that I had to do a watch steering, just like the other deckhands. The cook was the only one who didn't have to do that because she had 3 meals a day to prepare. We had this guy from South Africa who was the nicest, who was the sensitive guy. He left about a week before we left unexpectedly to get it because another boat was looking for someone. And they got this guy, Scott Anderson, who was from San Diego. And I met him and I said, hi, I'm Veronica, I'm from New York. And he goes, well, I'm from LA. I don't even think we shook hands. We had this whole animosity thing of being from different coasts. And he was very, I felt that he was kind of, he thought who he was. But I don't know that. My opinion, I don't really have an opinion of him. And then there was this guy, Alex Vasilevsky, who was only 18 years old. His father was the captain of another yacht, and so had asked Joel to take Alex on as a favor. And Alex was, the naughty boy. He never did anything he was supposed to do. He was always not working, listening to music or something like that. He was supposed to clean the bathroom. That's why their bathroom was dirty. It was always Alex's fault. And this had some crazy stories. So this is Joel, the captain.
So he did the navigating?
That's him using his sextant. We had a full radar navigation that told us everything. But he had maps and he had all the right things. He knew how to do it without it, which is very, it helps comfort you, Let's see. Okay, so this is Joel. This is Alex, and that's Hassan. You see this nice gear he has? They all had these Gore-Tex jackets that cost like $500. You had to have your own stuff. I didn't have anything like that. I had a $10 yellow rain poncho over a nice sweater a friend had given me. It still worked. It worked just as well as theirs. This is this guy, Jim, that wanted to be the dairy engineer, that was having a hard time with our engine.
Great tans.
Yeah. Oh, what did I do? Okay.
I'll get started crying.
Okay, thank you. Ding, ding. Let's go back. Yeah, okay. This is Scott, the guy from LA. There's Joel. This is actually in Sardinia at the end of the trip. This is below deck. That's our mess. This was my birthday. On my birthday, Isabel made a chocolate fudge cake for me. Exquisite. And you see, we had this is a little ledge here, so things don't go sliding off. Everything, even though we motored most of the time since we did it, whenever we put up the mainsail, you start to then go at an angle. And if you tack and send the sail over to the other side, everything changes. And so you have to go around and make sure that everything is secure. This is always the big cry of being on the boat. And these things could go flying into your lap without the ledge there. The ledge helped a little bit. We smoked below deck, which most boats they don't allow. But most boats had TVs and videotapes and things like that. We didn't have anything like that. Most boats had like a beer allowance for the staff. We had nothing like that. My room was the door to our bunk is right behind me. And this is my 29th birthday. And
What month is this?
And Hassan is joking around, which he was very good
What
at.
month?
What month? My
Yeah.
birthday?
Yeah.
Oh, May 30th.
And what month did you leave?
We left the beginning of May.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to introduce the crew. Oh dear, where's the schedule? There it is, look at that. So, the watch schedule. So I was on watches with Joel, the captain, the skipper. And Scott and Jim were on together, Hassan and Alex were on together. We did 4-hour watches generally. You do a half hour each, and then you switch. You're at the helm, you're at the wheel for half an hour, then you give the heading back to your partner, and you get to sit down and watch them and make sure they're not falling asleep. Or go get a coffee for them or whatever you want to do, but you need to, you're on duty. You're supposed to be keeping lookout, make sure that there's nothing funny. Some people saw a tree in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, things like that. There's things to watch out for. Right at 6 o'clock to 8, at 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock and 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, we had a 2-hour watch. And they did that because then this way it switches. That's why I did 3 separate days to show that it rotates through the days, so you don't have the same watch every day. It also was so that you could eat dinner. So these people would eat dinner at 6, and these people would have eaten dinner before they started their watch. So here's Joel and Veronica, and they come and relieve us, and then them, and so I go from noon to 4 o'clock, then I'm back there from 8 to midnight. Right before midnight, I would go down and wake up. At 11:30, I would go and wake up the people who had the next watch so that they could get up there by midnight. And then I would have to be back there at 8 o'clock in the morning, but I still would have to serve breakfast to the crew before I went on watch. But while I was doing that, Isabel cleaned up the dishes for me. Normally, I would clean with her, but while I was on watch, I didn't have to. And so then the next time, now you see here, now I'm 6 to 8 o'clock, and then I have my other one 4 to 8 in the morning. Waking up, getting woken up, you wake up at 4, you go up there, you have your coffee up there, and you get to see the dawn, which is wonderful. And that's how you go through life, and that becomes everything. We were at sea, when we left Antigua, we spent 1 week sailing up to Bermuda, where we thought Raymond Mendoza was supposed to go on a little cruise. He wasn't there. We waited a week for him. He never showed up. We took off across the ocean. It took us 2 weeks to get to the Azores. When we got to the Azores, he was supposed to meet us there. He wasn't there. He never came. We left very quickly. We went for Cadiz. He was supposed to meet us in Cadiz, Spain. He didn't show up there. We were then supposed to go to Sicily and take one of his team members from Real Madrid, one of the soccer players, on their honeymoon around Sicily. I'm Sicilian. I was so happy I was going to get to do this. We go through the Strait of Gibraltar. We ended up running into some mechanical difficulties. We never went to Sicily. Through the whole thing, when I joined the boat, they were always saying, oh, we're going to go back to Palma de Mallorca. That's another yachting center. And everybody wants to go there. They're going to see their friends. And Joel kept saying, we are not going to Palma de Mallorca. Read my lips. You will not see Palma de Mallorca this year. I will tell you, we never stayed in any of the places we were supposed to. We never went to most of the places they said we were going. But we went to Palma de Mallorca and spent a month there. And the thing is, though, you start saying, hey, this guy never knows where he's going. But then you realize you have your bed, you have your food, be happy. Like them. So yeah, isn't that great? That's a beauty. And these are all pictures of the ship. One thing I wrote about, I did write about this, trying to write a story, and one day I hope to get it
And
published.
so is that you?
No, that's Isabel and Hassan.
Uh-huh.
That's the cook and the first maid. He would always accuse her of giving him pork. And he'd get angry, and he'd refuse to eat it. I'm not talking about like a joke. It was serious. She bought some turkey chops. You know, when you're buying, first of all, if you're American and you go to other supermarkets, you don't know what people are selling you. They all have different names for everything, and different cuts. And they had these turkey chops. And these things did look like pork chops. They had bones in funny places. The quality of the meat wasn't really like foul. And he threw the food across the table. You're trying to poison me. Yeah. And he also he didn't think very highly of women. He didn't. That was the hard thing with him. He did not think very highly of your mind or who you were or what you can say about yourself or anything like that. He had an idea of what you should be doing. But he wasn't nice to the guys either, so, it's okay. This is a replica, yet another replica of America. There's more than there's one this one is from 1991. So this isn't my boat, but it's the same. And indeed, we didn't usually put up the topsails, those two, underneath the little pennants. But one time, going through the Straits of Gibraltar, we did put up the fishermen there. This is a flying jib, this one here. And sometimes you would replace that with a Genoa, which is a much bigger version of that really catches the wind. The first time somebody was talking about a Genoa, I was like, what are you saying even to me? And we had, everything is done on your radio. You always have your radio on channel 16, and you hear other people calling to each other. Then you always, if you have a private conversation, you take it to another channel. But channel 16 is where you keep your radio at for all the information. So people would be able to get in touch with us who didn't even know us, and they'd say, America, or gaff-rigged schooner off to our starboard. You sure do look beautiful in the moonlight.
Oh.
It was nice. It was nice. We knew we did. Yeah. That's that same picture from before. I had thought that it was from further back, but it was a different one. This is again in Sardinia. You have Scott, Joel, and Isabel. Okay, so we went up to Bermuda, which is right up there, and then we went to the Azores here. That took us 2 weeks. About 2 nights before we got to the Azores, we hit, basically they saw that the barometer was dropping, and they saw that it was a storm, a hurricane, but it was too big to be called a hurricane. So we did our best to just skirt the outside of it. But those waves started coming strong, and all of a sudden it was an all hands on deck call. And it was right as I was starting my watch. So I go up there, everybody's getting their gear on again, they all have these coats and this and that, and some people are arguing over, you said I could use it, but this person wants it. Already there was a feeling of unrest on the boat. Joel comes up, I take the wheel. I'm on the wheel. Joe comes up, he takes the wheel, he tells me, Veronica, I want you to go onto the foredeck, which is all the way up by the bowsprit, and I want you to keep count. And I'm like, what does he mean? And I go up there, the foredeck, the Hassan, the engineer, and the 2 deckhands are all on the bowsprit. They're facing backwards on the boat, and they're hugging it with their legs. They have no harnesses on attaching them to the boat. We quickly go where there are 30-foot waves coming over the top of the boat, and the whole boat is going through the dark night, up and down like this. They are dipping into the water. Hassan has placed himself on the end. He is totally dipping into the water and out again.
This storm hit at night?
Yeah.
Oh.
And and they're taking the sail down. So their hands are taking down the sail, which is wildly shaking. My job to keep count is to count them. So we'll know if we lose one of them, but it wouldn't matter anyway. There's nothing we could have done, really, honestly. During this whole thing, so no one went in. They all managed to do it. The guy who was the engineer did not want to be doing a job like that at all. He was terrified. He felt this isn't what I signed up for, And then they come and they need to take down the other sails. And the sails have a mind of their own and a lot of force. And they're taking them down. And during this moment, now I am being brought back to take the helm. And Joel goes over to Alex. The captain goes over to this young 18-year-old deckhand who's usually not doing what he's supposed to. And he starts yelling at him. And they're yelling, and you can barely hear them. You can just see them, And all of a sudden, though, Joel comes stomping back towards me and goes, throw Alex overboard. I want you to throw Alex overboard. And I'm thinking to myself, this isn't right. We're in a storm. It's life or death. The whole boat's going like this. And you're telling us to do something that you don't really want us to do, I hope. And so I really lost respect for him at that moment. All at once, just boom, that was it. To me, that was so inappropriate. Joel had lost a crew. When we were in Bermuda, I found this out. When we went to Bermuda, he took a day off, and he went and saw the gravestones of his former crew that he had lost at sea. Mm-hmm. And I think all of these things, change people.
Was he the only survivor, you mean?
Yes.
Oh. Did you all wear a life vest or?
No, nothing. Nothing safety.
Okay.
Nothing. So then they all come back, and so they're soaked. All the sails are down and tied up. All the ropes are tied up. This takes time. I'm talking about something that took 45 minutes, right? And they all go, and Hassan probably did most of it himself, I'll be honest with you. That's what I mean about Hassan. He was that kind of strong worker, excellence. And everybody goes below deck. They're all gonna go have hot chocolate and put dry clothes on. But I'm left to steer. So I'm up there by myself. I literally have waves coming over me and splashing all over me. And I just start smiling because I say to myself, we will not half die. If this boat gets broken apart, if I get pulled off the deck and into the ocean, it'll be instant death. And that's not what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of suffering. And I just sat there and sang every song, all my Motown hits while I was here. And they kept me on there for 4 hours straight by myself without a switch. And when they came, when Scott and Jim came to switch duties, they remembered that it was my birthday, which I had totally forgotten. And so that was the next day. You saw the whole birthday scene. That was the quiet, peaceful day. Then 2 days later, we arrived in the Azores, which people always ask, of course, what would you recommend? What was your favorite place to go? And I always say the Azores, because when you've been at sea for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden on the horizon you see these little bumps, they start off so small, and then you get closer and closer, and when you get to them, they're these very tall, conical, green mountains with little white houses climbing them as though they were little flowers going all the way up. We got there, we get into dock, you put your feet on solid ground, you're like, this is great. We thought we were going to be there for a week. We had so many things we wanted to do. We woke up the next morning. I felt the boat rocking. It did not seem right. We were already out at sea. The Azores were history. Raymond Mendoza had radioed them and said, you're out of there. And the cook had just gotten 1 hour to go provision in town and get a few eggs and a little milk.
Which island?
It was Horta.
Okay.
Yeah, and we had gone running up, and this was the other thing. So the first time we're on land, we can go where we want. We all stay together. From place to place. After the Azores, we went to Cadiz. That was another week later. It almost felt like it was the boat had a different air after that. There was some very strong feelings going on amongst people, but nobody talks about it. It's this whole thing again, where you're sitting at the dinner table with each other. You don't talk about problems or what you don't like. You don't go, I really didn't like what you did the other day or how you spoke to me. Nobody says anything like that. Everybody just silence at the dinner table. And that's a good lesson though. You don't always have to talk about everything. And it was good we didn't. We went to Cadiz. Here we are in Spain.
Where is Cadiz?
Okay, Cadiz is right here, just below Portugal. This little word here is probably Cadiz.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's Puerto Sherry. That's where sherry is made. And we went out to a nice dinner there all together and tried to see some flamenco dancing. Maybe we saw just one person doing some dancing there. But it was something to be in Europe all of a sudden, and to know. The other thing that happened is that, you go through all these time zones. But you don't count time zones while you're on your watches. That would mess everything up. So we only set our clocks forward when we got to Cadiz. So suddenly everything changed. And we're in Cadiz just long enough for me to do laundry. That's what I did all day. I did the laundry for the boat. It was a nightmare. Europe, Anyway, so we go through the Straits of Gibraltar. That was wonderful. you can't see both, you can't, if you were in the middle, you couldn't see either shore, but we actually hugged the cliffs and you could see them, and it was wonderful. And suddenly we were in the Mediterranean, and we were actually going along the African coast. The wind picks up all this red dust and throws it at the sails. The whole deck is covered with red dust and these like whiting fish that come flying out of the ocean and want to commit suicide by landing on the deck. And there we are, and along the African coast, and just to be in the old world suddenly is so intoxicating. And all of a sudden, our axle broke. So we no longer could motor. The captain says, we're gonna have to go to Palma. So we start turning towards Mallorca. Okay. This is Mallorca, right above me here. That's Sardinia, the bigger island that you see. But this little island straight up is Mallorca. There's Gibraltar. We start going towards Mallorca. We're sailing along. Suddenly the sea starts picking up. The wind starts picking up. Captain said, take down the sails. So we all get in our position. We get on our different halyards, which is what lifts the sails straight up. We all start handling the sails. Scott, the deckhand, is sitting on the main boom. The back of the main boom hangs over. Oh, okay, we'll go back to that. This. The back of the main boom, that's Hassan. Hassan could do something like that. This is in the middle of the ocean. He's out of his mind. But the back of the boom, that's where Scott's sitting, basically, is up there. And he's folding the sail, and we hit a bump, and I'm on the peak halyard, and I'm lowering it, and I'm looking at him as we go, and all of a sudden he goes in the water. And I'm thinking to myself, Scott, why are you going swimming? I really did. That's really what I thought. And all of a sudden, time just it was like that whole moment where like there's silence. And then everything goes, he goes in. We can't turn around because we're such a big lumbering boat. We don't have sail power anyway because we don't have motor power. We had to put the sails down. So I'm told to have the job, because I had glasses, of keeping my eye on Scott, the guy from LA. So I'm watching him, and he's drifting back further and further. You never realize how fast you separate from each other. I don't know how that works, but he gets further and further back, and we're moving forward, and I can't see him anymore. Meanwhile, again, with us never doing any drills, we had that little life preserver thing with a little flag attached to throw in. It was all knotted. It took them 5-10 minutes to get through all the knots to throw it in for him, so it was far away from him. When they went to drop the tender, they took the small boat, the tender, which was, sometimes they have a rubber one that's inflatable. We didn't. We had a regular boat. We lower it from the pulleys. The engine was not tied up to it. It went to fall in. Hassan caught it. Hassan caught it, put it on the boat. He's in. He takes off after Scott. The boat, his boat is literally, as it hits the waves, is literally going straight up in the air and back down again. He gets to where we can't see him because we can't see Scott either. And then we see him coming back. And we don't even know until he gets there whether Scott's in the boat or not. And he is. He was saved. And right away what they say when he gets on board is, okay, I guess I gotta give you your stuff back. Because the whole thing about life or death is something that's joked about then. You know, they're very, you know, what do you do if a man goes overboard? Tell the cook there's one less for dinner. Because you always want to keep the cook happy on the boat. Because she could give you anything, or he could give you anything. So that's why that's the best job. You get whatever you want, you know. But you don't want to upset the cook by not letting him know when you're going to miss dinner. This picture of Alex, he actually climbed out on the this rope here. He climbed out. There's a second one that's next to it, and he climbed out on those, onto the boom when the sail was out over the water. I think this was in the Mediterranean before Scott went in. Maybe that's where he got the idea from. But these pictures, but yeah, real daredevil attitude. We went to Mallorca. I have some pictures, some drawings, but also some pictures. We went into dry dock. You can come pass these around. I guess come see them if you want to later. We stayed in dry dock in Mallorca, living on America, for over a month.
Wow.
Everything had to be taken up a ladder. That was about 40 rungs long. And if you needed to go to the bathroom, you had to climb down the ladder in the middle of the night and go to this little outhouse in the middle of this, a dry dock is a world of work people, and it's not set up. Most crews would be put up in a hotel, but Raymond Mendoza was famously stingy. And so we stayed on the boat. Also during that time, Isabel went back to visit her family for a month. So I became the cook for the month, for a week. And to be the cook for the week really was hard. I had these similar things with Hassan being like, what are you feeding me? And stuff like that. So that definitely, I was thinking twice about my job on the boat. Although there were many things I loved about it. What then happened after being in Mallorca was that the Mendozas, we had taken their sons and daughters for a trip in Antigua. And they were wonderful. I made them cocktails, they were having a good time. They were, in their 30s. When Ramon and his wife were on, Janine Mendoza actually had an eating disorder. So this took something that would have been, it was not normal by any stretch of any means at all. And so I did end up leaving the boat within about a month's time after we left Mallorca. We went to Sardinia. Sardinia is fascinating. It's such a beautiful island, rose-covered cliffs, these secret little coves where we put the tender in and take the Mendozas to a quiet little beach. Then the boat would be out at anchor off the beach. They'd go on the beach for a few hours. We'd all swim from the other side of the boat and then get back on and make sure not to leave any wet spots on the boat and get all back in our uniforms again and like, hi.
They didn't want you to be swimming while
No. We were servants.
Oh,
Yeah. That's what I say. People go, what was your job? I was a maid. I was a maid to them. And being who she was, that was not possible to do too much longer. And they didn't really mind, but when I did leave, I will say, so Alex had left before we even got to Sardinia, or he left right at the tip of Sardinia. And they just said they'd do his work and make the little extra money. And when I left, they did the same thing. Scott helped serve meals and things like that. Isabel's job was always the same, and Hassan and Jim. And I did not, as I said, I did not get in touch with them after that, but it was a great experience. It really was. One thing that was very interesting, when we were in the Med, I was sitting there looking at pictures, and they had told me that the captain had an American girlfriend named Pamela come, and she was on the boat during one of the crossings. And they were sitting there showing me pictures of Pamela, and I realized I knew her from New York. And the sort of things like this that happened with America, with knowing people or seeing the guy next to me in Antigua, gave this very special feeling about it. I wrote this while I was on the boat. We're just left alone. This is Palma de Mallorca. In Palma de Mallorca, I had a very special experience at the cathedral there, you go to the cathedral, and under the flying buttresses are these little ponds. And in the ponds are black swans from Australia. And it was just so amazing to see them. Then you walk down, still as part of the cathedral, down these steps, and you come to this beautiful fountain. And the circular walls around the fountain are all a mosaic by Juan Miro. And it was just it had such a profound effect on me. It started a whole series of research projects that I took up about that cathedral and about Palma and the Phoenicians and different things like that. It was wonderful. And this is me in Sardinia. Here I'm not wearing my crew uniform. This was this shirt with khaki shorts. When I served dinner, I actually wore a sarong. That was part of the thing. The great thing about it was that, you have to be good on your feet. What I realized while I was walking on the boat with the dishes and the cocktail glasses and everything, and going up and down the steep kind of ladder steps like that, is that it's actually just like the movement of a subway car. It rocks this way and that way at the same time.
You should read it.
If you want to build a ship, don't give commands to saw wood, hammer nails, or paint tar. Instead, teach people to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And that's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and they say, there's a couple of versions of it, but they say his is a much longer, it's paraphrased from a much longer statement he makes in the Citadel. And so I said, well, if they're already paraphrasing it, I'll change it a little better, make it sound good. So that's it.
I know how you found your way to Veta.
With that same can-do attitude and with a willingness to there's a more of a story. There is more of a format. My husband had invested in some land in Colorado City. He loved Graneros Gorge. And that made him, he bought the website for Graneros Gorge. That's how much he loved it. He wanted to find out everything he could about it. We bought some different books about it and everything about the area. Then he got very sick in actually 3 years ago. Right at this time, he was in the hospital with an ulcer. And he realized he needed to leave his job in New York. It was just too much. And I had been the stick in the mud going, no, I don't want to leave New York. I don't want to leave New York. We've got to stay here. And then I looked at him in the hospital and I said, I've got to do this. I've got to get him out of here. And so we looked at Colorado City. And I was looking at it and we had never been there. I've lived in Idaho, I've lived in Utah, I've lived in the Rockies. I loved it. I was 11, which is right about around my daughter's age at the time. And I knew I loved the arid climate and the way you could just see where you were going. Instead of in the Northeast, you have the trees and it's all green and wet and damp. And Colorado City felt like it would be like on the side of a road or something like that. And so we just kept looking around. We looked in Rye, we looked in Westcliff, just online, for different houses. We got to La Veta and we started reading about La Veta. The Spanish peaks, I think, were part of the attraction. The fact that there was a railroad coming here. We thought it was the steam engine. You can't believe everything you read online, But it was so much going for it. The artist community, as well as the non-artist community. I have to say, I liked that it had a bit of everything. And we then got very lucky because when I told my father that I wanted to move out of New York, he was able to help us. And he had never said to me before, if you ever want to build a house, I'll help you. If you ever want to buy a house, I'll help you. He never said that to me. So it was just the particular moment in time, I think. It just went our way. and he helped us with the down payment. And so we were able, and we just drove out. I learned to drive to come out here. The first drive I did was cross-country. But I'd gone cross-country with my mother several times. So I think part of it, again, you know, being in Nepal, I walked all over in this, was considered at the time a medieval style culture. Walking all over, bringing bottles to get oil. I would get peanut oil and kerosene from the same man up this little pathway over the rocks and everything. And having done that, I did all the bargaining in town in Nepalese for the fruit and vegetables that I bought. And I was 9 and 10 years old, and from having done that, I truly believe if you put your mind to it, you can, you know, again, not to take glory for myself at all. I think you have to have angels. You know, I really do. I do. Yes.
I have 2 questions. One, the America, does it just go back and forth? Is that the deal?
So the America, so again, now there's more than one. If you were to look up on YouTube America, you probably wouldn't even see my boat. My boat ended up being in such poor condition that it's sitting in a port somewhere, and it's been bought by an Italian guy. The America went wherever Raymond Mendoza wanted it to be. But the yachting community does have a schedule, and it is December, January, and February in the Caribbean, and the summer months in the Med, especially around you know, Saint-Tropez and Cannes and all that area. And Antibes is a huge center, as well as Palma de Mallorca. When we were in Sardinia, that area, very expensive and exclusive. Extremely high prices to dock the boat. Porto Cervo, so it was 1991 and we were paying $15 for a beer. Which kept the drinking down, that's for sure.
Yeah. The second question, and you may not want to go into this, maybe a whole nother story, but you're saying you came back and then started doing research projects?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. Can you tell us anything about those, or is that too complicated?
No, it's not at all. There were 2 things. One is that the Lassoo Cathedral, I was just so mystified of where that name came from. What it actually is that it's the sea, the holy sea for that town. But there's also a Lassoo in Barcelona, and they also have geese there. And so I found that, and I also found it interesting that you have another one in Recife, Brazil. Which is, you know, one thing that I'll tell you that sailing taught me is that the world is small. When people start wondering about people, oh, it could never be that the pyramids in Mexico have anything to do with the pyramids. It's like, it is so close to go from Africa, from the western shores of Africa, to go to Brazil. That's like just a, you know, couple days cruise, you know what I mean? And I knew some fellows who had left Antibes. They had bought a sailboat, and they had no motor power, and they had sailed to Antigua. Now they had sailed. You have to know the time of the year and the trade winds, and you can rely on those. But they had gotten stuck in the doldrums for 2 weeks. They sat still in the middle of the Atlantic. So. I did a lot of studying about different people traveling. I found it very interesting to learn about the different people that came to America at different times who we don't really talk about. The fact that you had a lot of conversos that came at that time, that came, and a lot of Moors that were part of sailing crews as well. And I think that's kind of like the whole unspoken, all these untold stories. And I also really, you know, you can see how people, there are no atheists in the foxhole. I don't believe there are any atheists on a boat either. You know what I mean? I think you all need someone to believe in. And I think that people have what I thought about the Lassoo Cathedral was that it had been a site of different religions worshiping there at the same place, and that the people still, and that the place spoke of that value, to be there and to see it. And I think it's, yeah.
But none of your research, you left the sea after that trip?
I did. I actually was with some of the people at different times, my original friends I saw again. Yes.
Yeah, I spent a year working with a professor in Galicia who was from Mallorca, and then spent time in Mallorca with her family. And the interesting thing, and the father was an admiral in the Spanish Navy, and when he was young, he was a diver. And in their house, they have these amphorae from the Phoenicians.
Yes.
And we went out diving in a small island off the coast where the Phoenicians used to meet and trade, you know.
Yes.
But the people in Mallorca, I don't know if you ran into this, they say, well, you know, we're not Spanish, we're Phoenicians.
Yes. And that is the word, well, first of all, so the Balearics,
Yeah.
with Mallorca, Ibiza, and Menorca, are the Balearics. And that word is not from, you know, the Latin lexicon. It's actually, it's about throwing stones. And that was the Phoenician way of fighting,
Yeah.
which speaks to David a little bit, right? You know, too. So, I did know that there's, all through Catalonia, right? You have this the feeling that people have their unique heritage, and it's very meaningful to them.
Yeah, and Mallorquin is a dialect of Catalan.
Yes, yes. Which I didn't know at the time. And I was just going to say, and then I'll come to you, that the reason why, you know, there were no Spanish people on America. And that was because sometimes Ramon Mendoza, being the person he sometimes had the king on the boat. Some of the crew members had been there when the king was on. And so to make sure that there were no ETA or any terrorists on the boat, that's why they hired from all different places. But I'll tell you, having a Moroccan on the boat or a South African on the boat, they were not allowed to go on land in certain places. They were not permitted to go on to certain islands, which is very, very interesting. And yeah, you know, and having an American passport after I traveled through Europe after that, I had a point where I was sleeping on a train and they came through at the border waking everybody up. And again, this is 91. And all they saw was the outside of my passport. And he said, it's okay. And he went on to the other people. Yeah. I had a trouble with that passport though, because it had entry by sea, entry by sea. When I left Europe, they grilled me. Oh yeah, they didn't like that.
There are so many people who, in the Mediterranean, came through those islands. And so, I didn't spend any time in Mallorca, but in Menorca. And every town had actually 2 or 3 different names, Arabic or Hispanic or whatever. But what I wanted to ask you about in your research, there were these tablas and talayots in Menorca, which were prehistoric and looked like Stonehenge structures.
Sure.
Did you see any of those or find out anything about those when you were in Mallorca?
When I was in Mallorca, I stayed in Palma the whole time. I never even went to the beach. Again, that was partially because I've got that cooking job at that moment. Otherwise, I would have had more freedom. What I know, though, is all through Sardinia, you have them in years as well. And something that Manuel and I have talked about is our Sardinian heritage, which I think, you know, once you don't find much information about the Phoenicians. It's very hard to find it, and I think we owe that to the Romans. I think they did a great propaganda campaign of wiping it out, and that the only words we have left about them are tyrant and puny. That, you know, it tells you a lot right there. And yet, at one point, they had trading posts 1 sailing day apart, everywhere on both coasts of the Mediterranean, and then out and all the way up to Cornwall, where they were mining tin, I believe. Now, in Cornwall, you have, in Penzance, I believe, a street called Market Jew Street. And I believe that the Canaanite, so Phoenicians, we call them Phoenicians, but they were Canaanites. That's what they were. That's a name that the Greeks gave them.
Right.
It's always interesting to really think about what this means in terms of the Bible. Which tribe were these people? You have the Jewish tribes, but then you have the other Canaanites, And the Phoenicians were very smart traders. What they would do is they would one-day sail away, open up a trading post, and they would intermarry with the local people. Because that's how you get the best deals, right? Right? You know what I mean? It makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
Now, you also have the Jewish diaspora. To me, it follows a very similar theory of setting up shop and being a merchant, right? And you also have the idea that the Jewish and the Arabs and the Muslims would lend money. They would lend money. They would trust the guy that was their religion that lived 2,000 miles away to collect the money for them and get it back to them. It was a way that they could trust each other. So much did they know that their fellow adherents to their religion would do the right thing. So it's actually really fascinating. And it also is that, I always say, who were the Moors before Muhammad? Right? You have 620 AD, but all these people before Muhammad must have been, they were Semites, but who were they? Right? Were they just pagans? What were, you know what I mean? Who were they? Were they from some of the 12 tribes? I don't know, you know what I mean? The Esau's family, Esau's descendants or something like that. I don't know. It brings up a lot of questions that you have to do a lot more.
There are a hell of a lot of questions throughout the Mediterranean.
Yeah. And I love all of the other thing is that you have things like, the casinos of Majorca and stuff like that. That's a whole other thing. All these places that are, those were all Greek and then previously Phoenician settlements as well. They're ancient. Yeah.
When you said something about the different tribes or different ethnic groups that would bank with each other.
Yes.
My dad told me that his father, my grandfather, whom I never knew, I was born in America and he died in Greece, so I never knew him, but my dad said that his dad always said, a Greek never does business with a Jew.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of, the the Jews have been scapegoated for.
Absolutely.
And not only that, though, what I also believe from that, though, is that there's so many when you have the Spanish, when they kick out all the Jews and the Moors in 1492, same year Columbus sailed, that a lot of people changed religion. They were given that choice, actually. You could convert.
Yeah.
And they convert. Now, the whole thing about conversos is that some of them, and even in the United States, in New Orleans, you have families that know we always lit candles on Friday. We didn't eat meat, or we never ate pork, or all these different things, but it's so ancient, their history. And in fact, my grandmother's father from Palermo, his family did not eat meat. And they also intermarried. They wanted her to marry her first cousin, but her mother said no. And in his family, there were first cousins that married. And I've wondered if they were conversos, but it could be so far back you would not even know. Mm-hmm. But it also is to say to somebody, I thought this when they were gonna make, different laws saying that Muslim people couldn't come to America. Anybody who really wants to do something nefarious can lie. And so it doesn't matter, but people will change themselves for a lot of reasons. People will make great changes to help their families survive, to help their children prosper, to be able to keep a farm or an orchard that they've had for centuries already. You're gonna do what you have to do, I think.
Thank you so much, Veronica.
I have some, so this is the, these are my black swans.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time,
That was in flying electricity. Yes, I do. This is my artwork.
So,
Some of them are photographs.
see, because you want people to see, but to not do anything, it doesn't matter, I'll still make a fire, after I'll make a fire.